Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. In my 21 years as a reporter, I had a simple rule. If two people wanted to fight, I would hold their coats. I was only in it for the conflict. By that rule, what is going on Manhattan's far west side is the mother of all battles. Mayor Michael Bloomberg has hitched his dream of bringing the 2012 Olympics to New York and perhaps his own re-election prospects to a proposed new 70,000-seat stadium for the New York Jets on what today are Metropolitan Transportation Authority rail yards. The MTA has gone along with Bloomberg and Governor Pataki and approved the Jets' bid, even as they concede it does not generate the most money, at least in the short term. James Dolan and Cablevision, owner of Madison Square Garden, among other assets, don't want the competition of a nearby large public space and have suddenly found a new life as a real estate developer. They have offered more money up front to develop a commercial and residential complex that most pointedly does not include a stadium. At stake is not only more than $1 billion in public investment and Manhattan's last great stretch of unused land, but in many ways the future of the city. With a new proposal recently released for a new Yankees Stadium in the Bronx and the Mets' proposal for a retro new stadium in Flushing, we're either poised on the brink of a multi-billion dollars of public investment or boondoggles of unprecedented proportions, depending on who you ask. With a July 6th deadline for the International Olympic Committee's decision for who gets the 2012 Olympics fast approaching, and with legislative leaders in Albany balking at the quick decision demanded by Bloomberg and Pataki, this is crunch time. We are joined by three prominent New Yorkers to discuss the future of Manhattan's far west side. Jim Whalen is the executive director of Hudson Yards Coalition, a community group that supports the stadium. Joe Restuccia, a member of Community Board 4, is the executive director of the Clinton Housing Development Corporation and an opponent of the stadium. And Frankie Adozian is a City Hall reporter for the New York Post who's been covering the issue and will try to sort out the disagreements. Let me begin with you, Jim. Briefly, why is this a good idea?
Well, in short, it's a good public investment. And what do I say? That study after study has shown, even studies by folks who are really looking to oppose the project, like the Independent Budget Office, show that this project will not only return the public investment that's made, repay government for the investment it makes, but generate millions of dollars each year to pay for other government services like education, public safety, and housing. And then it's going to be a terrific job generator. And, you know, I mean, what folks need to keep in mind is Cablevision spent $30 million to sort of implant in people's minds that this is a stadium. But it's going to be much more than a stadium, because study after study shows that with the retractable roof and movable seating, its primary use is going to be as convention space. Located adjacent to Javits, it's going to be an important ancillary to the city's whole convention strategy. You know, folks often talk about how Javits is the 16th largest convention center in the United States. What is important to point out is it's number one in terms of number of people who attend shows, and number two in terms of number of shows that are held. So there's just an insatiable demand for conventions and tourists and visitors to want to come to New York. And that tourist dollar is an important dollar. I mean, each tourist that comes to New York City spends about $300 a day on restaurants, Broadway shows, hotels. And what's interesting is they don't take much out in terms of services. They don't educate their kids here. There's not an impact on the education budget, et cetera. So, you know, if New York City is going to continue to thrive and grow and provide the services that it needs to provide throughout the 5 boroughs, it's got to look for ways other than increasing taxes or cutting back on services. And one way is to grow the budget. And a big way to grow the budget is to promote tourism, promote the convention industry. And the New York Sports and Convention Center is a key part of that.
Why is this a bad idea?
Well, first of all, it's a football stadium. No matter how you cut it, that's what it is. And it's a football stadium put in the center of the most densest populated portion of this country, Manhattan in New York City. This doesn't make any sense at all. On top of the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel, it's going to create incredible traffic nightmares. And the truth is, in the whole discussion, it has been constantly turned into it's something else other than what it is. Most important to remember, it's sitting on a piece of MTA land. That's an asset for the MTA. The Jets, the city, everyone has done a appraisal saying this land is worth $900 million. It's being sold for $250 million to the Jets. That's robbing the MTA of a big asset, bottom line. So we talk about it a lot, gild it a lot, but it's really still a football stadium, and that's its main problem, which can't get around.
Well, let's take 3 points that Joe brought up there. No, just what's really very important here. The bottom line is, if it was just a football stadium,
I think we're in trouble.
If it was just a football stadium, why is MSG spending $30 million in a year to try to stop this facility? Because a football stadium wouldn't compete with Madison Square Garden and Radio City Music Hall. So, you know, there's got to be something more to it than a football stadium. I mean, the Dolans are not dummies.
Yeah,
they wouldn't be investing those dollars.
You constantly try, in this whole discussion, to talk about the Dolans. I don't care about them. I don't care about Cablevision. What I care about is this use, this place, and what it's going to be and what it should be. All right? That's the real discussion, and the way to deflect the discussion is talk about Cablevision. Guess what? To you, to Mr. Mayor, Mr. Governor, Cablevision is simply not the issue at hand. The issue is 3 city blocks on the west side, on top of the river, that should not have a 20-story box on them. That cuts all of us New Yorkers off from the river forever. That's one issue. Number 2, you don't get to buy public property for a cheap discount. Doesn't happen. And the MTA has totally breached its fiduciary responsibility in that manner. And really, the MTA should be held to task on this, and I think a lot of New Yorkers are questioning that. The third thing is, do you put this thing in this location? Is this the wisest use for the west side? Around the country, stadiums are built. They're not generators of development. They're just not. So it's important that in the whole discussion, you talk about Cablevision, talk about it's not a stadium, it's a this, it's a that, it's all those things, you come back to it, it's still a stadium. You can't hide that fact.
Well, it's convenient to sort of try to take Cablevision out of it, but if you take Cablevision out of it, all you're left is with NIMBYism. So.
You don't usually lose control this early in the show.
Man, you've totally lost it. You've lost your show.
Frankie, tell me what this all means. I mean, you've heard these you've been listening to these arguments for a long time, and on top of everything else, the mayor has staked his political future on this question.
You know, New Yorkers have been caught up in this sort of clash of the titans, you know. This is a situation where you have a billionaire, Woody Johnson, who decides he wants to bring his team, the New York Jets, to New York City, and the West Side is the best place for it. He talks to another billionaire, Mayor Bloomberg, who wants to do something with that piece of property in his capacity as mayor, and says, okay, we need to have something here that will generate economic development, give people jobs, and also help us in our bid for the Olympics. And then you have the other titan on the other side, James Dolan, who owns Cablevision, owns Madison Square Garden, owns Radio City Music Hall, will not stand for any competition whatsoever. So he has thrown money out there saying this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Then you have, and you know, Jim's right, they've done a really good job of saying this is just a football stadium. But when you look at the city's plan, it is more than a football stadium. It's not just a stadium, because what they want to do there is to have something that will create jobs long after the mayor is gone so that he can have a legacy. Now, can New Yorkers sort out through all of this mess? Perhaps, if they listen closely. But what it means is that New Yorkers are not really getting their voices heard. Is affordable housing the best use of that land? I'm not sure. Is a stadium the best use of that land? I'm not sure. But certainly something that generates economic development for the long term, especially when you hear that in New York today, almost 49%, I think, according to Community Service Society, of black males are unemployed. The number is the same for Latinos. On which side do you see a jobs prospect going forward for New Yorkers? If you tell them it's just a stadium, they may not want it. If you tell them it's just about jobs, they think, okay, we might want this. But then again, the person who's saying that this is such a bad thing is the person who is trying to block competition and line up his own pockets.
Everybody comes with dirty hands to this.
Quite filthy.
To this debate.
Well, I have to tell you, I live and work in this neighborhood, and I've lived there for 25 years. Well before we had any connection with Cablevision, this mayor, or 3 mayors before, those of us who live and work in a neighborhood kind of persist, as all New Yorkers do. And the truth is, it is part of a much larger plan, which was a rezoning of the West Side, which, contrary to Jim's contention, we're not NIMBY, meaning not in my backyard. We actually went ahead and supported a major plan to create 30 million square feet of residential and office construction on the West Side in the area called Hudson Yards and Hell's Kitchen. We were in favor of that, and we negotiated a big chunk of affordable housing into it to make sure that as the neighborhood developed, there was a balance between new development, economic development, and retaining affordability for neighborhood people and long-term New Yorkers. We're not against development at all, but you look at that plan, and then carved out of this whole plan and that whole public discussion and the real live review by the city council, by review people that we elected. Remember, we elect the city council. This stadium plan was plucked out of that as part of the public review process. Not one elected body has had a review of it, not one. And that was done very much on purpose in order to make sure that there would not be this balancing of interests here. It's owned by the MTA, means it's not subject to city zoning. The mayor doesn't control it, right? And all the boards that are approving and voting on it are appointed. They're not elected. So the truth is, for those of us New Yorkers who've been around a while and been through the redevelopment of Times Square, Columbus Circle, big projects on the West Side, The truth is, we're kind of hip to this. And if you really had public review, there would have been a different discussion here.
Yeah, there's some revisionist history going on here because, I mean, in December, Joe's organization, along with Cablevision, sued. And, you know, if the suit were successful, it would stop the expansion of Javits. It would stop the extension of the 7 train. It would stop the rezoning of the Far West Side that was overwhelmingly approved by the City Council. And, I mean, the other revisionist history here is Joe and his organizations. They opposed the northern expansion of Javits. It got approved by the legislature in January. They opposed the density that was proposed for the Far West Side of Manhattan. City Council signed off on 38.5 million square feet of space, sort of the largest rezoning in the city's history. So, I mean, it's nice to sort of say today that they support these things, but it wasn't the case a few months ago.
We always were in favor of Javits expansion because our people who live in the neighborhood work at Javits, and union people get jobs at Javits.
You didn't support the northern expansion of Javits. I'll send it to you tomorrow.
From day one, we were in favor of expansion of Javits. Expansion of Javits. Got it?
Yeah, no, I noticed, not the northern expansion of Javits.
No, yes, northern expansion without closing 39th Street. Parse the words. It's still not going to get rid of the reality that we were in favor of it. The second thing was, many people from across the city really questioned the amount of density being proposed for the west side. And in the end, the city council, negotiating with the neighborhood and the mayor, came to a compromise. And that's the normal process. It's normal that some part of the city agencies propose something large, community says less, and you meet somewhere in the middle. That's nothing new. It happens all over.
That's a beautiful thing, and I want you to keep that in mind for subsequent parts of this conversation.
Happens all over. But from day one, we've said flat out, the stadium's the wrong use for here. And no matter how you disguise it, early on in this process, it was called not a New York Sports and Convention Center. It was the multi-use facility. But it was, the acronym was the MUF. So they changed it out quickly.
I did prefer the MUF. I thought it was catchy.
No matter how you do say it, it is a stadium, but it's a stadium that's in use maximum 10 or 11 games a year. And the rest of the time, if the plan goes through as planned, it will be a concert hall. It will be an expansion of the Javits. It would be an ice skating rink. I mean, if you look at this plan,
An ice skating rink.
It has all kinds of things that could be possible
might
with
seize
this.
that idea.
Once the roof is pulled
How many
over.
square feet is set aside for Javits? Do you know?
I don't know the exact number, but what I'm saying is that, if people take the time to look at this plan, I think that, the people who are against it, like you, don't want a stadium.
Right.
And you say that you don't want a stadium, but it seems to me that if you look at this plan, it is a stadium, not even half of the time that
What
it
about
will be in use.
what about the Cablevision plan, which was the other plan that was before the MTA? Because of the $923 million assessed value of that site, Mr. Calico, who has a fiduciary obligation to get the most money he can for the MTA, by extension for the taxpayers, did go out to a bid, and there's disputes over whose bid was better. I mean, the Jets bid was $700 million, but when you yanked out the kind of contingent zoning sale of air rights, it really was $250 million.
$210
$210
Raised
million.
to $250,
And the Cablevision bid was kind of $400 million
And it wasn't real.
upfront. It wasn't real. Why wasn't it real?
All right, you just look at this company. I mean, this is a cable company. Just, some of you might get serviced by Cablevision, which, by the way, they don't pay property taxes on MSG. They get a free deal on energy. So, like, when you go on and turn your light on tonight, just know you're subsidizing their electric bill at MSG. But with that being said...
Except that the Rangers aren't playing all year, so maybe it's like less of an electric bill than last year.
Well, I mean, hardly a winning season ever either. Which gets to my point, is that you got a company that anytime it straddles outside cable has been an unmitigated disaster. The Wiz, Voom, the Knicks, Rangers. And here they step in belatedly and say, hey, we're going to be a real estate development company, And this is in light of the fact that they've spent $30 million over the last year in lobbying fees and advertising trying to stop this. They've brought now 4 lawsuits in the last 8 months trying to stop either the entire plan or the New York Sports and Convention Center. So it becomes pretty clear that, all the purported bid was about was to try to stop the New York Sports and Convention Center.
There you go again. It's so important. Attack the Cablevision stuff as opposed to the substance. The substance is that the MTA's appraisal, the appraisal done by the Jets, and the appraisal done by Madison Square Garden, all came out to roughly $900 million for the land, for the 3 city blocks. That's what they said. All 3 appraisals said the same thing. The highest and best use, to get the most value for the MTA, would be housing. That's what they said. So just do the numbers. The bottom line is 3 blocks, right? Now I'm going to finish. 3 blocks. And the offers were one at 210, the other one at 400. But the offers that were not made are the most important ones. The chilling effect that this mayor and this administration has put out there in the New York development community, nobody, although they were thirsting for that land, would put another bid in. When the MTA...
There was one by Transgas, I think.
Yeah, but Transgas was a truly bizarre bid saying, do something in Brooklyn.
But it was a lot
too.
of money, yeah.
Right, but the thing of it is, normally in this city, when the MTA or a public agency bids something out, for like a request for proposal, like the Coliseum, they put it out for bid. They give many, many months for people to come and bid in. It's clear that they want the real estate community to come and compete against each other. This was 1 month. It was a clear message put out by the administration, don't bid. And then the evaluation was done in a period of like a week and a half. Whereas for the Coliseum, it went on for 5 or 6 months to evaluate, and they rebid people. The MTA actually took the bids, they parsed them down, 3 or 4, and said, come back with a better number. That didn't happen here because the agreement was foregone. The conclusion was already
Yeah, I mean,
set.
there has been,
It's not the normal
there is
process.
The feel in the air that this was some sort of like a handshake deal.
A sweetheart deal.
Between two parties who, came together and their sort of interests.
And the
sort
two
of
parties being the
meshed.
city and the
Being the
Jets.
city and the Jets. The Jets want a new stadium. The city wants a stadium,
the
an
Olympics.
expansion of the Javits Center and the Olympics. But then again, city officials will tell you that, in years that place has laid fallow and no one has come to them with a very good plan that they could go
Well,
with.
no one
Yeah.
would go to the city officials because the city doesn't control the land. The state does.
Of course,
and
the sta- of course.
They didn't go to the
course.
state either. I
Of
mean, there's so
course.
much that Joe said there that I need to respond to. First off,
Please.
sort of a facetious comment that, that the papers just are loaded with stories about how the Bloomberg administration just threatens and bullies people. I mean, that's a real facetious comment. This canard that people were scared to step forward. Yeah, I mean, and picking up what Frankie just said, I mean, the bottom line is these yards have laid there for decades. Follow, nothing happening,
Forever.
no credible proposal. No one has come forward with an idea for it. So, yeah, the Jets have been working on this for 4 years. It hasn't exactly been a secret. You guys have been reporting on it for 4 years, And then here at this last minute, Cablevision trots in and says, I'm going to build
You're back to
Shangri-La on the west
Cablevision
side.
again.
Which, by the way,
There's
I mean...
no way to escape Cablevision
Yeah,
because
you know,
they
how
have
you-
pushed
No,
all
yeah.
of this money
But
into...
how you really escape it is you focus on what's really there. And the truth is, when you
Cablevision is really
No,
there.
when
Their
nothing's
ads
there.
are running every
No,
day.
nothing there. It's
rail
Cablevision
yards.
is spending a ton of money.
It's rail yards that have been surrounded by manufacturing zoning since 1961, okay? And when the zoning was changed, in the entire surrounding area, this spot was left out. If the Bloomberg administration had decided, as a broader planning policy, to take these 3 blocks of rail yards, as they did to the other 60 blocks that surrounded this area, and said, we're going to rezone this from manufacturing zone to higher density commercial and residential zone, there would not have been an issue for developers to come forth, as they are coming all over the west side, with all kinds of plans and actually starting to literally build. We have folks coming to our community board who are engaging with the zoning for real and doing this. They're going to be in the ground by the end of this year. That was a choice.
Maybe you'll drop your
That was a choice.
lawsuit that will block the rezoning.
It was a choice.
One of the
You know what?
there
This
was
is interesting, Bob, because I think, a couple months ago, several of the people who, want to be mayor were highlighting the fact that this sort of appeared to be some kind of sweetheart deal and yelling and screaming that, one candidate in particular said he talked to developers and many of them would like to bid on that property and didn't have the opportunity to. And when by confluence of events there was an opportunity for people to bid, there were only 3 bids that
Frankie,
came in.
I spoke to developers who specifically were told they should not bid on it, they would not bid on it. I've spoken to folks who have said they can't wait till this is all over because they intend to bid on this property.
well that
that's-
raises an important
exactly
question.
what I'm saying is that before there was an opportunity to bid, there were all of these people who were politicians who went out and said, developers are telling me they want to bid, they want to bid, they want to
Well,
bid.
no, I think Joe's point is that because the mayor has so much politically invested in this project, both for the stadium itself and for this dream of the 2012 Olympics, which I don't think we can leave out of this discussion because I think it's a really driving force in this. What happens on July 6th if Paris gets the Olympics? Does this project go forward?
If Paris gets the Olympics,
Or London or Moscow or
London,
whoever?
well, I think it's.
I think it's Paris.
I think it's Paris or New York.
Right.
And, with what people are saying now, New York is looking better. But if New York doesn't get it, then you begin to wonder, well, what does the mayor do at this point? What does his economic development strategy, does he go on with this because he wants to tell to the voters of New York that I'm a man of my words and I said this was not so much about the Olympics, but this was about a convention center? That's a quandary for him. Or does he just abandon the project altogether if we don't get it? I mean, everyone's waiting with bated breath for July 6th.
One other thing to consider is just the fact that, the move for the stadium is going to continue unabated regardless of what Mayor Bloomberg thinks. It has a tremendous amount of political support behind it. Bottom line is a majority of the Democratic Assembly members in New York City support this project. You look at the borough of Queens, 15 out of the 18 Assembly people support it. 9 out of the 14 City Council people support it. Why do they support it? Because they understand that it's good public investment. It's going to generate millions of dollars
A lot of
each year
people in
to pay.
Brooklyn as well.
Boom.
And they've
You know.
gotten great contributions from the Jets. It kills me that
Well, you'd
Woody
have to
Johnson,
document that.
Woody Johnson goes up to the Bronx and gives out political contributions to assembly members in the Bronx. He didn't even know where it was. Okay, that's offensive to me. All right, honestly.
Are you
And
sure
I'm-
he didn't know the geography?
No, I'm really.
may be
But let's-
stretching
I mean,
it a
I'm
little
just sort of,
bit.
I'm just sort of
No.
amazed by
the realm in which
I'm
these
just
guys
sort of
work,
amazed by Joe's
you know.
statement there because one, he can't back it up, and two, it
Right.
doesn't really say very much of politicians in Queens and Bronx. But I guess Joe hasn't probably been in those boroughs very
I think
much.
that those
But-
politicians care about one thing. I mean, I don't know that any of them really has looked at the
No.
merits of this and said one way or the other. What they're thinking is, you know what? This is going to be something that if it goes forward, my constituents can get jobs.
The Jets
That
have
is
done a
the
brilliant
number
job of selling
one
this. They've done a
issue
brilliant job.
in the
Well, they-
city
well, they
is
have-
unemployment.
Well,
And
they have made commitments to the minority women-owned business
they
enterprises.
have not just made
and those
commitments,
are
they
firm-
put it
those
down
are-
on
Those
paper.
are contractual commitments.
No, they have gone out and done a major, minority women business enterprise agreement, which is to their credit 10 times over. The sad part is I really believe it's never going to happen, so therefore the jobs are never going to show. And they're never going to be there. And I've seen these guys come out, and I've seen assembly members and council members from the Bronx, from Brooklyn, come out and say, this is magnificent. The truth is, they haven't been to the actual project site on the west side. They're not engaging with it. And they do want the jobs desperately. And I'll tell you something. If I had 49% of my constituents unemployed,
You
I
would
would
want the
take
jobs too.
anything possible. But in this issue, though, you must step back a bit and realize it's not just the promise of the jobs. What is good for the entire goddamn city? And I believe that so
But that- but-
sincerely.
And,
But
and that's
that- but
why they're
that's-
weighing in favor of the project. And, as a resident of Queens, I sort of take offense that elected officials in my borough are supporting this because Woody Johnson gives them contributions, or it's
happened
reported that
before.
they don't visit the site. Just pick up on something Joe said before, because there's this thing about the MTA not getting fair value. The MTA did an appraisal for the site, and picking up on what Joe said before, it's all negotiation. So when you do an appraisal and you're the MTA, you want to really start out as high as possible. So it came out $923 million, but you got to back out the cost of the platform. So that brings you down to what, 525, 575 for the use of the entire site. It assumed what's called an FAR of 12, building out the entire site. So I mean, the Jets' proposal was, now it's $250 million plus the $440 million that 6 developers would have used,
that's
paid
not real,
for.
it's gone.
If Joe, I don't interrupt you. So
But it's gone, though, right?
Oh, right, because the MTA has decided to hold on to it
So you
because
can't
it
talk
becomes
about it.
much more valuable over time.
It doesn't exist now.
There's not only a deadline of July
But if
6th.
Joe, picking up on your reasoning, then it wouldn't exist under the appraisal.
Control of the show. No.
I've lost control before. July 6th is not the only other deadline. The Jets have set an earlier deadline for this deal to be accepted. Is it June 1st, June 30th?
What
I can't
they've
remember.
said, just to be clear, is that they
I
need
don't
to order
understand
steel
this.
by the end of May in order to open in 2009 and in order to play the Super Bowl in New York City in 2010.
Well, how
And the
serious
deputy
is
mayor
that?
said
as a-
May 15th, 04 was going to be approved and settled. There have been a series of artificial deadlines in order to jazz up the public and jazz the government up over and over. And we're just getting through it.
Well,
the
and there's-
deadline is July 6th. That's the real one.
And then there's another deadline, which is action by the Public Authorities Control Board,
Right.
which is the governor, the Speaker of the Assembly, and the Majority Leader of the State Senate. And at least the 2 legislative leaders have been quite cool in their comments about committing, in essence, a state agency selling its land at this price. So, do you have a sense of how this is playing itself out politically?
Yeah, discussions are underway. Staff is being briefed. Leaders are being talked to, and confident that Shelley Silver and Joe Bruno are going to do what's in the best interest of New York.
President of the
and
Jets flew up a helicopter the day after the MTA.
Now, it's not very nice that Joe interrupted me there, because I've been very polite to him.
Come on,
so with
Jim.
that being said,
Come on.
Shelley Silver and Joe Bruno, they'll make the best decision in the interest of New York City and New York State, and I think I'm confident it'll be approved in the New York Sports Convention Center.
What's your read on the politics of this?
Well, Shelley Silver was at City Hall, I think last week, and there was an event in reopening of Park Row in Chinatown, and that's his district. And after the event was over, we journalists asked him, this is coming up before you guys. You haven't said much. What are you going to say? And basically, he says, it's not before us now, so I have nothing to say and want
Sounds like
that.
Shelley Silver, right?
He's keeping his cards close to his vest, and, you know, at some point he'll have to make a decision. I think.
But both he and Bruno have indicated that they don't want to be rushed. They've been very, that's the one thing that they
Yes.
have said.
Of course, they don't want to be rushed, but, you know, will they be the ones, you know, will they be the ones who, if New York, if we don't get a stadium and we don't get the Olympics, will they be the ones to take the blame? I mean, there are all of these things that are.
Well, but let's talk about the Olympics for a second, because this July 6th deadline, to some degree, is an artificial deadline imposed upon us by the
Right.
International Olympic Committee. Should we be mortgaging the future of the city to this? You know, first of all, I mean, there's a question of whether we need the Olympic Games to start with. I'm a little bit of, you know, I'm kind of a skeptic on that. I
We don't need it, we want it.
I don't know that we need it to arrive. I mean, we're not, you know, Orlando.
Yeah, I think we definitely
We don't
want
need
it,
it, but we want it.
But the truth is, we don't need it to put ourselves on the map. The vice
No,
president
I
of the
mean,
Jets
no.
said it'll put us on the map. I think we're on the map.
Yeah, I would agree with what Joe said. It's one of the few times we've agreed to that. I mean, it would be good to have
we
it.
want it.
Yeah.
The real question is,
But to what degree is the Olympics and this July 6th deadline and the mayor's commitment to break ground and Deputy Mayor Doktorov's commitment to break ground prior to that July 6th date as a
The
demonstration
importance of that,
of good
the
faith?
importance of that is when you look historically in New York City, the way to beat development is to delay, delay, delay. You just try to
That's
delay it
true.
so it loses momentum. So the beauty of having the July 6th deadline was it focuses government. It focuses people to act, and it tries to get decisions made. With that being said, I mean, I got a big surprise for Joe and everyone is if we don't win the Olympics on July 6th, trust me, there's going to be a renewed effort July 7th to make sure this project's fully implemented.
I totally believe that the Jets are committed to that, and God bless them. But the truth is, the public appetite to spend $600 million plus of public money on a stadium that truly is, whether you call it a football stadium or not, is no longer an Olympic stadium. It's a whole different story. Because a lot of this project has been dressed in Olympic clothes. Remember, everyone's waving the flag. It's a great idea. But if we're not the site, right? If we're not the site, does it make sense not only to give away the public land at a low price, but also to put in a lot of taxpayer money in here when we have other priorities?
But doesn't
Well,
it? Go ahead,
yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
think the world of Joe, but I
you
would-
know, we as journalists, we sort of like, we hear this all the time, and
Right.
it just,
Doesn't sound real?
it's not that it doesn't sound real, but it's like, you know, whatever happens on that land, a platform is going to have to be built. We are going to have to spend that money, whether it's for, you know, a convention center or a stadium. That money is going to have to be spent.
Why does it have
housing,
to be
or
spent by the
housing.
public treasury? Normally, in today's world in government, the government offloads the cost of public
No,
infrastructure.
Developers are
out.
not going to come and build on that if there is no infrastructure. If you don't put a subway line, if you don't put transportation, no one is going to come and invest if people can get there easily.
Which is the other, you
know,
know, it seems to
if
me
you don't
that the
extend
extension of the
the
number
number
7
seven,
line,
if you don't-
which is being paid for by the city and not by
The
Yes.
extension of the number 7 line really is about creating a commercial district, not about a residential district.
Well, also,
But no, but you,
obviously
but
it's gonna
what,
serve
what
a
is it that
residential
you,
district.
what is it that you would like to see there? A mixed use, right?
I believe it's a mixed-use neighborhood.
Exactly,
Absolutely.
and
Commercial
there must be
residential.
infrastructure which the city and state have to pay for before any builder
But not-
builds
not-
housing or shops or a convention
But not
center.
necessarily the
That
pla-
money is going to have to be
You know,
spent.
I personally think that it does make sense for the MTA and the public treasury to pay for a platform and then do what they did in Battery Park City, where in essence we spent to build the land and then site by site over a long period of time to realize the absolute maximum value back to the city and the state of New York and the MTA to let developers do this over a period of time. Because the truth is, the private sector does do development better than the public sector.
Private
And if you
sector is
do-
not responsible for infrastructure.
I'm talking about, I actually said that I believe that the public treasury should pay to build the sewers, the platform.
Well, if you,
But
if
then
you
you
believe
take-
that, then you shouldn't say we're spending $600 million on a stadium.
Because
the
no,
city is not
no, be-
spending $600 million on a stadium. The city is spending $600 million to build the things
No,
around it and to
no.
put the roof as well.
The city's spending probably more than $600 million, as you know, because it's not just the platform and the roof. There's a lot more components to here that are off budget. So the conservative estimates are about $1 billion total in public improvements.
Oh, that's not true.
And the truth is, though, what do you do if the city doesn't have that money to spend, which is always the conundrum now in government? In the Clinton urban renewal area up on 10th Avenue between 51st and 53rd Streets, there's open rail cuts. The city cannot afford to put in those platforms. What it did is it put out a request for proposal for developers to build a platform and build buildings over them, and also to do improvements. They're going to build some theaters and open space. The truth is that happens a lot in government today where you don't have the resources, so you offload the public improvements to the private sector, get them going, and then over a period of time, something happens.
Let me go to some questions. Tell us your name, speak up loudly, and tell us your campus.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Marola. I'm from Brooklyn College. And my question is, this will be especially directed to you, Mr. Rasuccio. Hypothetically speaking, the plan's approved. The Olympics come to New York City 20 years from July 6th. What's a newspaper headline going to read when it's asked about the economic impact of the stadium and the convention center expansion, specifically on unemployment, property tax rates, and the surplus in the city budget?
You're going to get all that in a headline?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Jets football stadium expected demolition to start next year for major new development project. As has happened all over the country, where there have been these big behemoth public projects that actually don't bring the character and the sort of like texture that happens in a city when it gets developed over time, as opposed to quick fix projects.
The entire Hudson Yards plan, which Joe's organization opposes, is going to result in
true,
billions of
silly.
dollars of revenue for the city and state,
Silly,
and hundreds
silly.
of thousands of jobs for New York. And the bottom line is it's really about New York City's economic future.
Now go ahead.
I was just going to say, those of us in newspapers, we just don't know.
And you also don't know
We
what's
take
going
it day by day.
You also don't know what's going to happen. It could be Britney Spears' grandchild at that point and could take it off the front page. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Magda Kaminska, John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And my question is, considering Olympics, is it absolutely necessary for New York to have the West Side Stadium in this particular location? And is there any other possible place for the Olympics to have a stadium?
More specifically, Flushing.
The IOC visited New York City at the end of February, and the IOC evaluation chair said that we need assurances that an Olympic stadium is going to be built if we're going to seriously consider New York City for the 2012 games. One of the things that the Olympics considers is the idea of legacy, that they don't want to build white elephants. And what works well about the New York Sports and Convention Center, or the Olympic Stadium in this case, is the point I've made before, is it's going to have a use afterwards. It's going to be used for conventions. It's going to be used for football games. It's going to be used for plenary halls. If you build in Queens, which, it's sort of Democratic mayoral counties love to say it, they don't focus on the facts, which is there's a public cost attached to that right up front, about $350 million to condemn and relocate about 100 businesses, do environmental remediation, drive pilings into the marshlands, et cetera. That's $350 million from government with no assurance as to how it's going to be paid back, because it's not clear who's going to use it.
Anyway. It's going to have to be done for a new Met Stadium anyway.
Yeah, but the thing is, you got to do the calculation as to how government's going to be paid back. With the New York Sports and Convention Center, you're bringing a football team into town. It's already demonstrated it can bring big events like the Super Bowl, and there's other conventions that can come and use that facility. The Mets, if you're talking about the $350 million I'm referring to, you're talking about moving them across the street. You're not talking about new economic activity for New York City.
The truth is the stadium can be built in Queens, but the Jets don't want it. And if the Olympic plan was there and the Jets weren't involved in this, there would have been a stadium in Queens as a proposal, because in fact the Olympic bid for the U.S. has a backup site as required by the United States Olympic Committee in Queens.
Yeah, I noticed Joe didn't
Yeah,
rebut
I
my
think,
points about
her-
the public cost in that,
her
but
question about is
Why
that
bother?
I think it is necessary to have some sort of an arena for the Olympics.
Absolutely.
But I think the city, if this didn't happen on the West Side, could still host the Olympics by building a stadium elsewhere. There's also the Frank Gehry Arena going to be built in Brooklyn. The plan can be adjusted if this does not happen.
Yes, sir.
I am Jason Schaff from Brooklyn College. When Bloomberg took office, one of the first things he did was he dismissed the plans that Giuliani put forth in his last days in office for Yankees and Mets stadiums. And then on January 8th, I believe it was back in 2002, he put forth the plan for the Jet Stadium. Isn't it wrong? I think it's wrong that he put plans aside for teams that have been loyal to New York, and then put plan for the team that left New York 20 years ago. Like, it puts a same plan for that. Isn't it also wrong that there has not been a vote on the Olympics or the Nets or Jets stadiums?
I don't quite understand the last.
Well, I
part
mean, one of the
question.
questions is the kind of, I'm not sure in a multi-billion-dollar development question that, our loyalty to teams that haven't left is really trumps to pick a name.
In fairness to-
Trumps the cold hard cash aspects of it.
And in fairness to the mayor, the plans laid out by former Mayor Giuliani would have committed the city to spending a lot more money. In this situation, Woody Johnson's going to pay much more than the city would put in for this particular project.
But also part of this was not the mayor's plan to start out with. This is the deputy mayor's plan. Deputy Mayor Dan Doctoroff, deputy mayor for the Olympics.
That's the mayor's plan, though.
It's the mayor's plan.
It became
He
the
works
mayor's
for Mike
plan big
Bloomberg.
time. Now it does, big time. Now it does. He didn't conceive it.
I mean, do you have, in terms of the Jets having deserted, I've always said that if we could use capital money to hire the Jets a field goal kicker, I might be more open to all of this. Yes.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Adam Cohen from John Jay College. Jim, first of all, a big supporter of a stadium. My question is really towards Frankie. What is the difference now for the stadium than 2 years ago when the Yankees wanted to move in?
Into the West Side. That's a very good question.
It's pretty much, it's the same kind of situation. I don't think that the Yankees were willing to commit as much money as Mr. Johnson is in this situation. I mean, yes, a Yankee Stadium also would not mesh with what the city officials' vision of what that place is, because a Yankee Stadium or any baseball stadium would be simply a baseball stadium. What they want is something that stays behind. The IOC always talks about legacy. We want you to build an Olympic Village that will become apartments afterwards. We want you to build an arena that once we're gone, this is gone. The difference between the old stadium plan for baseball teams and the new stadium plan is that this is something that can be used for something else. And the financing will be done primarily by the Jets, not by... Now, in terms of when you compare the two plans, the city would have had to pay more of its own taxpayer money for a Yankee Stadium.
Yes, you're right about that.
And that is the difference
But
between
how
these
many
two
people
plans.
know, with the complexities of this financing, that in fact the Jets' investment is much less than is portrayed?
Well,
it's all that complex
that
things
may
with
be
bonds floating
right,
back
but
and
the
forth,
question was about the two plans, the
Yeah,
two
that's true,
stadiums.
that's right.
The Jets are going to pay much more than the Yankees would have paid for a stadium.
And actually, Joe's characterization is not correct. I mean, the Jets have already agreed that when it comes to the infrastructure investment by the city and state, the Jets are going to cover cost overruns.
No, I'm talking about the bonds that are floated to build the stadium, what are called the Jets bonds. And most people don't know the Jets bonds, the interest on them and the payments are going to be paid for with what would have been the real estate taxes paid on the stadium.
Yeah, I'm really glad Joe brought that up, because that's an opportunity to sort of
So
correct
that's
some of the
fascinating. It's
mistruths out there.
instead of me paying my real estate taxes to pay my tax to the city, I pay them to pay my mortgage.
What Joe's
That's
referring
that
to,
means.
but Joe always forgets about the taxes Cablevision doesn't pay on MSG. But
There you
with
go.
that being
That's
said,
somebody else.
with that being said, what Joe's referring to is the Jets are going to be using tax-exempt financing to help pay for a portion of the stadium, which is
And
very
they're gonna
common
be
when it
us-
comes
and
to
they're gonna be
sports
using a
facilities.
pilot.
So, for example, it was done with
Payments
the
in lieu of taxes,
It was
because
done
we
with the
don't know what
U.S.
pilots
Tennis
do.
Center in Queens that was negotiated by then Parks Commissioner Betsy Gotbaum. And what happens is, with that tax-exempt financing, there's no hit to New York City or New York State government. There is a hit to the federal government, admittedly. But what the city and state have turned around and done is, with the tax savings the Jets realize, is told the Jets that they need to invest that money in other infrastructure in the area. So they're paying for the pedestrian bridge over 33rd Street. They're paying for the community porch between 33rd and 34th Street, and they're paying for half the pedestrian bridge up at 39th Street. So, the purported tax break the Jets are getting through this tax-exempt financing is not going into Woody Johnson's pocket.
That's not the
It's
tax-
going into infrastructure in the area.
I don't mean that at all. Not the. What happened is that when you do tax-exempt financing, you save taxes. Period. So the Jets were compelled back and forth in negotiations to plow some of that back into the site and improvements surrounding the site. I'm talking about that at all. The bonds that the Jets are going to float specifically are tax-exempt bonds, and instead of when you buy a house, you got a mortgage.
Yes, I
You
do.
got a mortgage, and every month you bring something home, and you have to pay that mortgage, right? And then
We do it automatically.
Yeah,
That's
right. 4 times a year you pay your taxes, and that goes there. Nobody ever
We
said
pay only once a year because we're in a co-op. I'm sorry. But
that's right. But in this case, instead, the money that would have been taxes is not going to go to the city 4 times a year, but it's going to go to pay the interest on the bonds, meaning the mortgage for the house. And I'm sorry, that's a sweetheart deal.
The problem with Joe's analogy is that the Jets are renting. The MTA is the owner of the site, retains ownership, and so that's why the Jets wouldn't be paying
But
taxes.
if you
for
had a
this
development
property.
of a similar amount of money, that was generating similar amounts of tax revenue as opposed to pilots, that would not be going into a dedicated fund.
Just to pay your mortgage.
Just to pay in that area. It would be spread through more
Not
throughout
even that area. It's
more
just
throughout
the
city.
mortgage.
Right.
The Jets bonds we're talking about is nothing to do with Hudson Yards development, parks, infrastructure around Hudson Yards, none of that. This is solely the Jets bonds. And that's where the money that is paid for taxes, instead of being paid going to the city treasury, goes to pay those bonds. And that, to me, is one of the complicated parts of this thing. And you talked about regular New Yorkers certainly get lost in this, because damn it, I get lost in this, and I've been in this for 2.5 years of trying to figure it out. It's really hard to follow this thing.
It's very hard to
a lot
follow,
of subsidy.
but it's also not. It's not new, because I believe that the city, this administration has used this for other projects.
No, first time ever.
I believe that they testified at City Council that they've used this for something else. I don't remember the exact project, but
You're actually talking about that's another revenue stream called the pilots, which the city wants to, it's supposed to contribute $300 million of its funds to build a platform and the roof and everything. That's what you're referring to. This is a separate set of bonds. There's like 4 sets of bonds here. And the truth is, they've only spent ever those pilot money, $65,000 a year, as opposed to $45 million a year, which they're going to dedicate to pay for the city's contribution to this, let alone the Jets taking the city's tax money and using it to pay their mortgage. That's what makes, there's a lot of layers of this thing.
Yes, sir.
evening,
Can
my
you
name is
give
Joe
us
Mancino from
can you give
Brooklyn
us a couple of $100 million to help us out here?
No problem. All right, looking in this situation, I do appreciate the politics of it. You have a divided city. You have Mayor Bloomberg, a Republican administration, in favor and support of the stadium. You have Speaker Miller from the City Council, strongly opposing. Anyone here, political interest, political mindedness, you see, of course, he can't support it. The essential problem, though, comes to the breakdown of the MTA being the Metropolitan Transit Authority instead of being the Metropolitan Transit Agency. City agencies, state agencies are privy to oversight, while authorities do get away with, I'm not going to say going around corners, but they can make decisions without the direct oversight that the city agencies are exposed to. My question is, Joe, I do side with you in a lot of your points, but why did you not call upon some entities like the particular borough board? You have a borough board that is supposed to oversee any issue that will determine land usage. That's one of the assets you should be using. City and state overview, you should hold it accountable. Those are your elected officials to work for you. The EDC, who is supposed to do a study on any capital project that will...
Let me try to cut you off.
Sure.
I also talked over you. What's your name and your campus?
Oh, I apologize. Joseph Mancino from Brooklyn College.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, we didn't go to the borough board.
And Joe, I'm sorry, can I bring up one more point?
Sure.
I apologize.
You want to be up here? No, go ahead.
In the wake of what's going on with city planning, city commissions, and city zoning, especially if you look at South Brooklyn, capital projects are occurring. Downzoning, preserving the unique characteristics of the neighborhood. It took a simple petition with the city planning commission to get that ball rolling. Went from the community board, goes through the ULURP process, goes to the borough president.
Let me cut you off.
Why did that not occur?
Well, I got a good answer for you. The truth is that this whole project was not subject to the whole ULURP public review. And the mayor made a decision not to do that. And that's why the borough board, the community board, all these folks were not involved in it. The Hudson Yards rezoning that surrounded it was subject to the public review. And that's why there was that big give and take and compromise. And the truth is, we have other projects owned by the MTA or by the state. Times Square is one, and then the Coliseum is the other on Columbus Circle. Both of those, although they were state-owned land, there was an agreement between the governor and the mayor to bring them through the public process. So we had this healthy debate happening, and there was a vote at the end of the city council. It didn't happen here. It was a choice.
One thing I wanted to point out, because this came up earlier about Columbus Circle, is as Joe pointed out, the MTA owned that site. And if you recall, some in the late 80s, Mort Zuckerman had the deal to sort of buy it. And I don't know if it's the same group, so it was the same mentality, got to stop development on the west side. And there's sort of litigation and tried to slow the process down. And, eventually got done what related 10 years later. But you know who paid the price? Strap hangers paid the price. Because when you sort of looked at the deal the MTA ended up doing several years later from a net present value basis, strap hangers got shorted $400 million because the MTA didn't strike when the iron was hot. And it's a similar theory here, which is, we could sit around decades hoping for that developer Joe's talked to is going to come forward and develop these rail yards. But bottom line is no one stepped forward with a credible proposal other than the Jets.
Well, what happened at Columbus Circle, because I covered the story, was that Mr. Zuckerman had the winning bid and the market collapsed in 1987.
That's right.
And took his bid down with him. But when you talk about the strap hangers campaign, I think you're making a more general point about strap hangers, is precisely one of the groups that in fact sued on the day the day before we're taping this show, arguing that the MTA has not gotten full value. and that has an implication for all the other development projects
In
that
fact,
the MTA
I
wants
think
to
the
do.
public advocate has also filed a similar lawsuit
Filed today.
this
Filed today.
afternoon. saying
Lawsuits
the
on this
MTA
case are like a losing next season. It's
Well, I think that
predictable.
they
You know,
have-
it's like,
You know, the interesting part, though, is they're also part of the normal public process in the city when, in fact, the city government or the state government tries to go around the public process or not live up to it. And that's the sad part, to me, of this thing. We went through Columbus Circle. We learned lessons there of what to do and not to do. And Jim really tries to always make this black and white. You folks don't like development. Wrong. We folks actually embrace development when it's balanced, when it's got a lot of different elements to it, when it's affordable housing, when it has jobs attached, and there's like minority and women business agreements in it. These are things we appreciate, okay? But not just, okay, here's this and that's it. The West Side doesn't work that way. And the truth is, the projects that have been built, the Mort Zuckerman proposal for that Coliseum was horrific. What's there now is 100 times better than the proposals prior. And you go through a process when sometimes a government agency overreaches their grasp, and then they get sued to death.
well, I mean, you know, in the case of the Zuckerman thing, the bottom line is Straphanger's got hundreds of millions of dollars less by having to wait a decade to commensurate that deal. The bottom line is if the MTA had done with deal with Zuckerman when he'd looked to do it, the transit system would be a lot better off. And, you know, just in terms of the black and white thing, well, the facts are clear. The organizations that Joe's affiliated with on the West Side opposed an expansion of Javits. It passed the legislature in December. They opposed the rezoning of the
Keep
Hudson
saying it doesn't
Yards.
make it so, Jim.
You know, and now they're suing to try to stop it all.
You know, I don't see how this project would have been able to go through the Uniform Land Use Review process, which is the ULURP process, not just simply because it was on state land, but because of all the other factors around it. I don't think this is something the administration could say, well, let's talk about it when they're trying to have an Olympic bid, when they're trying
But
to...
isn't that part of the artificial date driving this
we
to
have a
some degree
public-
that
we have a
distorts
public
the
process.
normal
I
process?
completely
Right.
agree with you, but this is a situation where you say, okay, we're in the administration, we don't have to do this. This is state land. We're not even going to try and push the issue because, you know, the city council does not have oversight over state land. We're just going to try and do whatever we can to make the best bid we can and to hope that the Jets come through for
Or
us.
maybe we want to do whatever we want to do without considering the public input into this. In Times Square, the project that was proposed was universally condemned because it was
Those
an
are those
ugly,
four huge
four
towers,
ugly,
right.
upside down elephant. Four ugly corporate campus towers, right? And the truth is, although people may not like some of the crash commercialism of Times Square, that's its history, you know, and it's a very like a mall, but it's still, it's lively, it's full, it's much more, 42nd Street looks much more like what it was, and it's active, and it's connected to a community. It is not a sterile corporate campus. And that's what the administration at that point proposed, and it got shot down dramatically. And then, of course, like you said before, the real estate market collapsed and the thing died for a long time.
Except that this current administration that we'll have, you know, will tell you that for years that property has laid fallow.
And that is-
this is and sometimes, you know, you have to strike while the iron is hot.
I don't think there's an iron I think it's an artificial iron, number one. And the rezoning that's been done around it makes it possible. And the third thing is, Times Square being
But also-
redeveloped means that developments move west in general. You can't do this 15 or 20 years ago because nothing was near it.
You
Now
have to give
development's
them
there.
credit for the fact that this rezoning that has been done
get-
would not have been done had there not been a plan. I mean, had there not been a plan to actually try to get this on, this rezoning would have been like at the bottom of the list of everything else going
One
on.
of the
It's
last
a
things,
great
you know, this
rezoning.
idea that
It's
it's
a
not
great rezoning.
the
It's a
stadium not
great
being
rezoning, you're right, but would it
Very
have taken place if there was not this driving force there?
Just-
to
Where
put
is
this-
where is the Olympics part of the rezoning? It was on the book. It was literally on the books to happen before the mayor even came in.
It'd be really great if Joe went into the judge tomorrow and they dropped their environmental litigation, you know, based on the idea that the rezoning is great.
Let me take another question here, please.
Hi, my name is Merville Alexander from Brooklyn College, and I'd like to, just for you guys to clarify this for me, that as CUNY students and public school students are told of budget deficits as a reason for tuition hikes and poor public school conditions, so then how is it that the city and the state can afford to make such a donation to the building of a stadium, but yet we have to pay more money in tuition?
Because you know, the bottom line is, you know, the city is faced with a structural problem when it comes to its budget. You know, $3 billion a year, expenditures exceed revenue that the city brings in. So it's faced with three choices. It can raise taxes, it can cut services, it can raise taxes or fees like tuition, it could cut services, or it could seek for ways to grow the economy, create jobs, and bring tourists into town. These are folks who are going to spend money and generate tax revenue that goes into the coffers and help expand the economy and help things like the city budget. And the New York Sports and Convention Center, that's why it's such a good investment. The bottom line is study after study has shown that the public dollars that are put into it will not only get repaid, but it will generate millions of dollars each year to pay for things like education.
I think it's simply a matter of priorities. Either we invest in education, and we invest in new school buildings, and we take our capital money, which is very scarce, and put it in things that really matter to New Yorkers, whether that's investing in a new firehouse or renovating 10 schools or building 2, or putting it into public sports facilities that truly do not benefit, end of the day, and have the same benefit back to our city as those other improvements do. And we want economic things to happen. Shouldn't they happen? They really should. But the truth is, you put all your eggs in one economic basket. Any developer will tell you that works in the business world, you don't put everything in one basket. Spread the risk. Do this development over 3 blocks in many different projects over a period of time, and you're certain some will fail, some won't. But you put all your eggs in one basket, it's way too much of a risk.
Well, I think, I don't really know what the state's rationale is, but I think the government's rationale is that they have to do something to generate economic activity so that the students of now will have jobs in the future, which will be the argument for the platform, the expansion of the number 7 line, and all the other stuff around there, regardless of what happens. They will argue that that money needs to be spent now so that businesses can come into that area as opposed to, using that to keep tuition levels low.
Do you believe if Bloomberg is defeated, that the next mayor, assuming that the stadium goes through, do you believe that a subsequent mayor would kill this stadium?
I do not know. There was a mayoral forum this morning in which I think this issue sort of came up with the 4 Democratic candidates, and none of them was actually, I don't remember any of them saying that, if it went through, they'd kill it. I think, some of the candidates believe that this could have been done differently, that there could have been better public input. But were they to become mayor on January 1st, 2006, and it's already been approved, I don't know that they would kill it because
But they were also asked if we get the Olympics, can it be in Queens? And all of them said yes, it could be in Queens.
The Olympics will be in all 5 boroughs.
Right. No, they were asked if the stadium could be in Queens.
The stadium could be in Queens, could be in Staten Island, it could be anywhere.
Yeah. I think that, we're dealing with an artificial deadline, an artificial proposal, and the truth is we're at the end of it. And when we get to July 6th, that's going to change the politics, but we don't know. It's not there yet.
I don't know. I ain't too good at politics, but one thing I think people lose sight of.
My wallet, by the way.
One thing I think people shouldn't lose sight of is putting things in context. That where I live in Queens, folks might have an opinion on the stadium, but that's not what they're going to vote on. They're going to vote on quality of life.
I'm not so sure I agree with you.
But the polls back it up. There was a poll done 2 or 3 weeks ago where 3% of the people who responded to the poll said this was an issue that would move them in the election. 3%.
I think you have to. I think that. New Yorkers, when they go to the polls in November, are going to be thinking of the most important things to them, which is education and employment. And if this stadium does not happen, it gives an opportunity for the incumbent or people who love him to say this was a great economic engine and we've missed an opportunity. And that may result in, the voters thinking about that when they go into the polls.
Do you have a sense of this as a political issue in the mayoral race?
I'm amazed how it's become a central issue. I mean, I'm amazed how the candidates are just hit on this constantly. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? And in fact,
partly that's press-driven, obviously.
No, but these folks were not.
No,
no.
No, it's not. I mean, they've done some polling, and some of them, some candidates came to this issue later than others, but they've done some polling, and they think that this can actually help them.
I mean, 65% of New Yorkers say no. This is a bad idea.
Well, I mean, if I had Cablevision's money, I could convince, with $30 million, I can convince folks that this is SUNY TV and not CUNY TV. But, with that being said, what's driving this is if you look at the political landscape in the September primary, in addition to a mayoral race, you have 1 borough president race, which is in the borough of Manhattan, and you have about 7 city council primaries, most of which are in Manhattan. So, folks are playing to, I'm not saying that this project is loved on the west side of Manhattan. So, folks are playing to that politically with that type of voter coming out for the September primary. So that's what's really driving the Democratic mayoral primary.
I think New Yorkers aren't stupid at the end of the day, and they make a choice about priorities. And when they keep putting this together, do we want to put the public money in? Do we want to put the emphasis? Quite frankly, the administration is entirely focused on West Side Stadium at this point. to the exclusion of a lot of other things.
Do we,
I don't know.
do we
That's point.
agree?
Williamsburg's going on. West Chelsea.
Do we agree that if we get the Olympics on July 6th, that the stadium is essentially a fait accompli?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the people who oppose it, will oppose it until the first brick goes into the ground.
I wouldn't underestimate Cablevision's tenacity.
Not speaking for Cablevision, for people who live and work on the west side, I would say that I don't know if we're really, once we get to the Olympics, we'll see. I think it changes the dialogue no matter what. the
But you
question
think that if we got the Olympics, it's a huge impetus for the
it's a huge. There's no question whatsoever, and that's why they're spending so much money out there trying to get those Olympics. Truthfully, you know.
And
Well, actually, most of the effort, a lot of the effort, that's going into the Olympics is actually people donating their time. In fairness.
No, I'm talking about trips by the deputy mayor to the Olympic Committee, doing the kinds of things which, quite frankly, if we were concerned about our city here and what we can do in our city and not just thinking about our Olympic dreams, which I don't know how many New Yorkers are deeply invested in Olympic dreams. We have dreams today, like, better schools, better streets, better subways. These are pretty good dreams.
This administration has the largest capital budget in, education's history in New York City. We like to talk about the Olympics, but let's talk about it in dollars and cents terms. As he talked about the creation of 125,000 jobs and generation of about $13 billion in private sector impact. And as Frankie's pointed out, something that will impact all 5 boroughs in a real positive way. So, there is a meaningful economic strategy behind the idea of going after the Olympics. And folks like to say, everything this administration does is geared to the Olympics, but there's a rezoning going on in West Chelsea that Joe's very familiar with, nothing to do with the Olympics. I was involved with the rezoning of downtown Brooklyn that had nothing to do with the Olympics. They have economic programs going on in all 5 boroughs.
That is true. I mean, there's, in your borough, in Brooklyn, there's going to be a new pier being built down there. There's all kinds of development.
Yeah,
I mean, this is getting the most attention, but there are things happening in the city.
well, it's getting the most attention, I think, because it's in Manhattan, and
But also, there's a lot of things tied to this. I mean,
But it's not where Frank, it's not where the emphasis is. The truth is there are a lot of things happening, and this mayor and this planning commission have done
there
more.
are a lot of things happening.
No.
Excellent.
They've done more, I'm saying, in terms of,
I'm going to ask you.
making change.
I'm getting the goodbye sign. I'm notoriously bad on time, and I always try to meet deadline. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you all.
Thank you.